The war with Iran has entered a stage where destroying targets is no longer enough. Because now the real question is no longer just who can bomb harder. It is who can keep the pressure alive for longer. And right now, the clearest sign of that shift is a name that until recently meant very little to most people: Kharg. The island handles most of Iran's oil exports and has now become one of the most sensitive strategic points in the entire war. The United States struck military targets there, but deliberately left the oil infrastructure intact. In other words, Washington did not just bomb the island, it made clear that it is still holding back an even bigger lever against Tehran. And when a war begins targeting the financial lifeline of a regime, it enters a different category. That is why the deployment of the USS Tripoli and roughly 2,500 Marines matters so much. This does not look like the movement of a power that sees the conflict nearing an end. It looks like preparation for a longer campaign, a more unstable campaign, and one with more options still on the table. In Washington, concern is already growing over the possibility of boots on the ground, and the debate around Kharg itself shows that this war is no longer centered only on military destruction. It is increasingly about economic leverage. But on the other side, Iran is also playing for a longer war. Iran's goal is not to defeat the United States in raw firepower. Its goal is to survive, retaliate, and make the conflict so politically and economically costly that the pressure becomes difficult to sustain. The regime is betting on a war of attrition built around endurance, energy disruption, and decentralized command. That is where the idea of mosaic defense becomes critical. Iran's structure was designed to keep operating even after devastating attacks against central leadership. In other words, even if top commanders are lost, the system can keep functioning. And that makes the war much harder to end, because individual cells can continue fighting even after large-scale strikes. And that decentralization creates a second danger. It raises the risk of miscalculation, escalation, and a conflict spreading further across the region. Israel has clearly recognized that. The country has entered a new phase by striking sites linked to the IRGC and the Basij inside Iran, trying to weaken the regime's internal control mechanisms and create pressure from within. But there is still no clear sign of internal collapse. In other words, Israel is trying to disrupt the regime's internal machinery, but the political outcome of that pressure remains uncertain. At the same time, Iran's most powerful weapon may not be in the sky or on land. It may be at sea. The Strait of Hormuz remains heavily disrupted, and under normal conditions, a massive share of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas passes through that route. That turns this war into a global problem. And the impact has already gone beyond oil. A critical part of the trade in fertilizers and agricultural inputs also depends on this passage. That means Iran is not only trying to pressure energy markets, it is threatening supply chains that reach farms, food systems, and the cost of living in multiple countries. And there is one more detail that makes everything even more sensitive. In the United States, suspicions have emerged that Russia may be providing Iran with strategic information about American assets. Moscow denies it, but the fact that this possibility is even being discussed shows how serious this conflict has become. Because when a war begins raising questions about indirect support between major powers, it stops looking like just another regional crisis. It starts to carry much greater weight in the international balance. In the end, that is what defines this moment. The United States is pressuring Iran's main economic artery without closing every door. Iran is responding by turning energy, trade, and decentralized resistance into strategic weapons, and Israel is trying to erode the regime's internal control. The result is a war that is becoming less linear, more expensive, and far more difficult to bring to an end. The message now is clear. This war has entered the stage where survival itself has become strategy. And when that happens, any conflict becomes much more dangerous. If you want direct and engaging analysis of the wars shaping the world, subscribe now to Conflict Front, because here we track the wars shaping the world.